Usually when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there's like this expectation of clinical precision.
Right.
Yeah, like engineering level precision.
Exactly. I mean, if you fall off a ladder and break your arm, you go to the hospital, they run you through the x-ray machine, and a few minutes later, the doctor points at this jagged white line on a glowing screen and just says, there it is. There's the problem.
It's totally binary. I mean, the bone is broken or the bone is intact. There's no in between.
Yeah, it's clean. And it's comforting because, well, we crave visibility. We really like our problems to be neatly categorized, physically verifiable.
Mm-hmm.
But the moment you step into the world of internal invaders, like organisms living and feeding and reproducing inside the human body, that pristine X-ray machine metaphor just completely shattered.
Oh, it falls apart immediately.
Right. We're looking at a diagnostic landscape that isn't just murky. Historically, it is a battleground of philosophy, religion, and just sheer biological horror.
It really is the absolute definition of diagnostic muddy waters. I mean, for the vast majority of human history, an internal infection wasn't viewed as a biological organism at all.
Yeah.
It was an existential threat. It was, a breach of the self.
So to you listening, our mission today is that we are constructing a comprehensive, step-by-step guide to removing these internal invaders. We're tracing the historical evolution of this eviction process, starting from the ancient practices of casting out demons all the way to the modern medical eradication of parasitic infections.
It's a huge journey.
It is. And I was digging through this fascinating stack of sources for this deep dive. We've got academic journals on the history of parasitology, early modern medical dissertations, articles on cutting-edge genetic research, and even some contemporary fringe internet writings.
Yeah, quite the mix.
Yeah. And what blew my mind is that when you put a medieval exorcism manual right next to a modern gastroenterology textbook, the underlying logic of how to evict an unwanted squatter is eerily similar.
And, well, that similarity exists because for thousands of years, the boundary between the physical and the supernatural just simply didn't exist.
Okay.
Yeah. To our ancestors, a physical worm writhing in the gut and an invisible demonic spirit corrupting the mind, they were essentially two sides of the exact same coin.
That's wild.
They were both invasive forces that had breached the sanctity of the human form.
So to really wrap our heads around this, think of the human body as a pristine 5-star luxury hotel. You've got an immune system acting as security. Your metabolism is keeping the temperature perfect. The kitchen is fully stocked, and the staff is running everything smoothly.
I love this analogy.
Right? And then you get squatters.
Yeah.
Unwanted, destructive guests who just slip past the front desk, break into a luxury suite, order endless room service, and start tearing the copper wiring out of the walls. Now, whether you look at an ancient Egyptian text that calls those squatters demons, or a modern medical journal that calls them helminths, which are parasitic worms, the step-by-step eviction process follows a surprisingly consistent playbook.
It really does. But let's actually look at the biological reality of those squatters before we dive into the eviction manual, because the scale of the threat is just immense.
Yeah, lay it on us.
Well, humans are currently hosts to nearly 300 different species of parasitic worms, or helminths, and over 70 species of protozoa.
300 species. That is horrifying.
Right, and these aren't rare anomalies. They are some of the most successful organisms on the planet, and human awareness of these invaders stretches back to the very dawn of recorded medicine.
Yeah, I was looking at the translations of the Ebers Papyrus from ancient Egypt, and that dates back to, what, around 1500 BC?
Roughly, yeah.
And they weren't just vaguely guessing about illness, They were writing highly specific medical texts about these horrifying creatures. And one of the most terrifying examples they dealt with, which actually still exists today, by the way, is the guinea worm.
Oh, the guinea worm. The scientific name is Dracunculus medinensis.
Yeah, I have to explain how this thing operates, because it genuinely sounds like an alien invasion movie.
The life cycle is just a masterpiece of parasitic engineering.
It really is. So it starts when someone drinks water contaminated with microscopic water fleas. You can't even see them. But inside those tiny fleas are the larvae of the guinea worm. Your stomach acid dissolves the water flea, which, you'd think would be the end of it.
You would hope so.
Right. But no, the acid actually triggers the larvae to activate.
Yeah.
They penetrate your intestinal wall, literally chewing their way out of your digestive tract, and they migrate into your body cavity where they mate.
And then the males die off shortly after, having fulfilled their biological purpose. But the female worm begins to grow, migrating down through your subcutaneous connective tissue.
Usually toward the lower limbs, right?
Exactly, mostly the legs or feet.
And she grows to an astronomical size. I mean, we're talking up to 80 centimeters long.
Yeah.
That is nearly 3 feet of worm living just under the skin of your leg. And you might not even know she's there for a whole year.
Which is the terrifying part.
But then she needs to release her offspring back into a water source. So she secretes a highly acidic chemical compound that literally burns a hole through your skin from the inside out, creating this agonizing blister.
The pain is described as feeling like liquid fire. It's an intense, localized burning sensation. And while this burning serves a very specific evolutionary purpose, how do you alleviate a severe burn?
You plunge your leg into cool water.
Exactly. The human host, driven completely mad by the pain, runs to the nearest river or pond to submerge the blister.
Oh, wow.
And the moment the worm senses the change in temperature and the presence of water, she violently expels hundreds of thousands of new larvae directly into the drinking supply, starting the cycle all over again.
It is literal biological mind control through pain. Now, Carl Zimmer wrote a book called Parasite Rex, and he poses this incredible theory that these specific worms were likely the fiery serpents described in the biblical book of Numbers that plagued the Israelites in the desert.
It fits the description perfectly.
Right. They experienced this writhing creature emerging from their flesh, causing fire-like agony, and they interpreted it as a divine punishment, a literal serpent of fire sent to torment them.
Which perfectly illustrates why ancient cultures didn't neatly separate the biological from the spiritual. Imagine living 3,000 years ago. You have no concept of germ theory.
No microscopes.
Right, you don't have microscopes to see the water fleas. All you know is that you committed some transgression, and months later, an invisible force begins consuming you from within.
And it eventually manifests as a monstrous serpent tearing its way out of your leg.
Exactly. You experience this as an affliction, a curse, an evil entity that has possessed your physical form.
And this maps perfectly onto how the New Testament conceptualizes demonic possession. When you look at the original Greek texts, the modifier used to describe possessing spirits is a katharton.
Yes.
In modern English translations, it usually just says evil spirit, but a katharton actually translates to impure or not purified. It's directly tied to ritual cleanliness and pollution.
That's a crucial distinction.
Illness in antiquity wasn't just a breakdown of a machine, it was an active personification.
Yeah, in traditional magico-medical practices across the ancient Near East, an illness was treated as a sentient being. You wouldn't just ingest a powder and hope for the best. The healer would speak directly to the affliction.
Like having a conversation with a disease.
Right. They would command the entity, flee, fever, or depart, demon of the gut. The possessing demon was conceptualized as an invasive, invisible force that altered the host's fundamental nature. It caused erratic behavior, wasting diseases, and immense suffering.
Okay, I have to push back here for a second because this is where the modern mind tends to get incredibly arrogant.
Oh, definitely.
It's so easy to sit here with our modern scientific literacy and just say, well, ancient people were just ignorant. They call bugs demons because they lacked the technology to see them. End of story.
Right.
Are we just looking at primitive misunderstanding, or was there actually a deeper philosophical logic to viewing these infestations as spiritual events?
That is a phenomenal question. And if you look at the historical consensus among medical anthropologists, it points far away from simple ignorance. These were highly observant societies.
Okay.
They recognized the profound transformative nature of an invasion. Think about what a parasite actually does. It doesn't just occupy space.
Right, it's active.
It alters the host's metabolism. It redirects nutrients. It can even change brain chemistry and behavior. It literally steals the host's life force to fuel its own reproduction.
It's vampiric.
Exactly, vampiric. And the fear of being consumed from within is a primal Jungian shadow. We fear parasites fundamentally because they represent a powerful, mindless force feeding on the vulnerable self. The ancient worldview was holistic.
So the physical and the spiritual were the same thing to them.
Right. A physical worm causing a physical disease and a demonic force causing a spiritual disease were both expressions of a universe out of balance.
I was reading about how in Hindu cultures, particularly in parts of India and Nepal, they have a deeply ingrained tradition of worshiping Nagas.
Ah, yes.
These are serpentine, semi-divine entities that are believed to reside in springs, wells, and rivers. And the belief is that the Nagas protect the sources of drinking water, and if you pollute the water or disrespect the environment, the Nagas will strike you with waterborne diseases.
It's fascinating.
It really is. It is a brilliant way of ritually and culturally managing this deep existential fear of the invisible things in the water that can take over your body. You respect the water, you perform the rituals, and you avoid the curse of the parasite.
It's essentially an epidemiological survival strategy encoded as religion. The boundary between physical contagion and spiritual pollution was entirely porous.
So, with that ancient, blurry line established, let's open the manual.
Yeah.
How do you get the squatters out of the luxury hotel? Let's walk through step 1 of the eviction guide. Identification and preparation.
Okay.
Before you can kick them out, you have to know what you're dealing with, and you have to prep the building for a fight.
Right. And if we look at early modern and medieval Europe, their diagnostic tools were obviously entirely different from ours. They didn't have genome sequencing.
No.
But they were intensely observant of cause and effect. Medical thinkers like Gilbert the Englishman in the 13th century or Nicholas André in the early 18th century operated under the paradigm of spontaneous generation.
Wait, spontaneous generation, meaning they literally thought these complex living worms just materialized out of thin air inside the stomach.
Not out of thin air, but out of corrupt matter. This is rooted in Galenic humorism, which dominated Western medicine for over a millennium.
Right, the 4 humors.
Exactly. The theory held that the human body was governed by 4 humors: blood, yellow bile, black bile, and phlegm. Digestion was viewed essentially as a cooking process. Your stomach was a cauldron that cooked your food.
Okay, I'm tracking. So how does that lead to worms?
Well, if you ate improperly, say you gorged yourself on excess sweets or rich meats, or you had a weak digestive fire, the food wouldn't cook properly. It would putrefy in your gut, creating an excess of cold, wet, phlegmatic humors.
Ew.
Right. Nicholas André and others believed that this rotting, stagnant sludge inside your intestines provided the perfect primordial soup. The worms didn't enter from the outside. They were birthed directly from your own corrupted biological waste.
Oh, wow. So the squatter didn't break into the hotel. The hotel left so much garbage in the hallways that the garbage spontaneously morphed into a squatter.
Precisely. And this wasn't an exclusively European idea either. If you examine ancient Chinese medical texts, brilliant physicians like Sun Simiao from the Tang Dynasty or Wang Kentang later on painstakingly categorized the 9 worms that afflict humanity.
Oh, interesting.
And they arrived at a remarkably similar conclusion regarding the cause: diet. They blamed the acquisition of these worms on consuming too many warming and damp foods.
What does that mean in practical terms, though? Like, what are damp foods?
In traditional Chinese medicine, dampness is a concept related to sluggishness and stagnation in the body. Eating excessive amounts of rich meats, heavy dairy, alcohol, and especially raw or undercooked fish was thought to create a damp, stagnant environment in the digestive tract, which then bred these parasitic worms.
Which is intensely beautifully practical. I mean, even though the underlying mechanism of spontaneous generation is scientifically wrong, the behavioral prescription is spot on.
Exactly.
They realized that eating rotting meat, drinking bad water, and hanging around damp, unsanitary environments led to massive parasitic infections. They didn't need a microscope to figure out the epidemiology. They just observed the inputs and outputs.
It's a testament to the power of clinical observation. Now, contrast that medieval reliance on observing humors and dampness with how modern science identifies the invader today. The sheer technological leap is staggering.
Let's hear it.
Let's look at the work of Dr. Phil Laverde, who has dedicated his career to studying schistosomiasis.
I want to pause on schistosomiasis for a second because we hear about malaria all the time, right? But this disease rarely makes the evening news.
Which is tragic, really.
Yeah, because it is the second most devastating parasitic disease in the world globally. It infects hundreds of millions of people, mostly in developing nations, causing massive organ damage, extreme fatigue, and developmental issues in children.
It's caused by flatworms called blood flukes that live in the veins around the bladder or intestines.
So how are we fighting it?
Historically, we've had a very effective drug to treat it, called praziquantel. But Dr. Laverde noticed a terrifying trend. The worms were developing resistance. The drug was stopping working in certain populations.
That's terrifying.
So how does modern medicine identify this new resistant squatter? They don't look at phlegm. Dr. Laverde and an international team of researchers undertook the monumental task of mapping the entire genome of the schistosome parasite. They published this sequence in the journal Nature.
Wait, How does sequencing a genome actually solve the problem of drug resistance? It's not like the worm has a sign on it saying, I'm immune.
It comes down to protein structures and molecular binding. A drug like praziquantel works by binding to a very specific receptor on the worm cells, much like a key fitting into a lock.
Okay.
When the drug binds, it forces the worm's calcium channels to rip open. Calcium floods into the worm cells, causing massive, paralyzing muscle spasms. The paralyzed worm is then swept away by the human bloodstream or digested.
Okay, so the drug is a chemical key that forces the worm into paralysis.
Right, but if the worm's DNA mutates, the blueprint for that lock changes.
Yeah.
The receptor alters its shape just slightly. Now, the praziquantel key no longer fits.
Ah, I see.
By mapping the entire genome, identifying all 390 million base pairs of the parasite's DNA, scientists can pinpoint the exact gene responsible for building that specific receptor. They can see the molecular mutation that caused the lock to change shape, and once they know the new shape of the lock, they can design a new chemical key.
That is just incredible. It's molecular espionage. So you've identified the invader. Whether you think it's a demon drawn to your spiritual impurity, a worm born of your rotting diet, or a schistosome with a mapped genome, you still have to prepare the hotel for the eviction.
You can't just go and swing it.
Right, which leads us to Step 1, Part B, preparation and fasting.
This is perhaps where the overlap between the spiritual texts and the biological reality becomes the most profound. In nearly every spiritual tradition, you do not attempt an exorcism on a full stomach. Fasting is a critical prerequisite. Look at the biblical account in the Gospel of Matthew chapter 17.
Right. The disciples are trying to cast a demon out of a young boy who is experiencing severe seizures, but they can't do it. They fail. Jesus arrives, expels the entity, and the disciples pull him aside privately and ask, why couldn't we cast it out? And Jesus responds, this kind goeth not out but by prayer and fasting.
In the theological framework, fasting was seen as a requirement to gain spiritual authority. By denying the physical flesh its desires, you elevate the spirit. You become spiritually pure enough and powerful enough to command the impure entity to leave.
But when you look at the alternative medicine texts and even historical medical folklore, they utilize the exact same tool, fasting, but explain it through a purely biological lens.
Yes.
And just a quick note to you listening. As we dive into these alternative and historical medical theories, please remember we are strictly exploring this as sociological and cultural history, okay? We are not doctors, and we're absolutely not giving you medical advice on how to treat an infection.
A crucial boundary to set, absolutely. So, looking at these historical texts, they suggest that fasting serves a highly practical dual purpose. Biologically, what happens when you stop eating?
You stop sending room service up to the squatters.
Precisely. Parasites in the digestive tract rely entirely on the continuous stream of nutrients you ingest, particularly simple carbohydrates and sugars.
So they feed off your food.
When you initiate a prolonged water fast, you drastically alter the ecosystem of your gut. The stomach acid concentrates, the constant flow of easily accessible glucose vanishes, and the physical parasite begins to starve. It weakens. It loses its physical grip on the mucosal lining of the intestines.
But the spiritual texts claim you are weakening the demon by cutting off its energetic food, things like low vibrational emotions, gluttony, or toxic worldly attachments. But wait.
What is it?
If you stop feeding a biological tapeworm, it gets weaker because it has no sugar. If you fast to weaken a demon by cutting off its worldly food, what, you essentially doing the exact same biological thing, just describing it with a different vocabulary?
That is the pivotal realization here. The physical intervention is identical. The ancient practitioner says, I am abstaining from food to weaken the demon's energetic hold on my spirit.
Right.
The modern alternative practitioner says, I am fasting to starve the helminth in my digestive tract and trigger autophagy. The mechanism of action on the human body, depleting glycogen stores, altering the gut microbiome, depriving an invasive entity of resources, is exactly the same. Only the cultural lens has shifted.
Wow. Okay, so the hotel is prepped, the squatters are starved, they are weak, and they are vulnerable. It's time for step 2 of our guide, the expulsion protocol. This is where we compare exorcism versus purgatives. How do we actually force them out of the building?
In the ancient spiritual paradigm, the expulsion was intricately tied to the concept of air and breath. If you look at the etymology, the Greek word for spirit is pneuma, and the Latin is spiritus.
Both meaning breath, right?
Both of these words derive directly from roots, meaning breath or wind. Because a possessing demon was conceptualized as a literal breath entity, a corrupted air occupying the body. One of the primary methods for expulsion was exsufflation or insufflation.
Which means what exactly?
It is the literal forceful blowing out or blowing upon the patient by the priest or healer to drive the corrupted spirit away. The holy breath of the healer was meant to physically dislodge and expel the demonic breath.
They were quite literally trying to blow the demon out of the person. But obviously just blowing on someone isn't always enough to clear a severe infestation. So if the breath doesn't work, what did they escalate to?
They escalated to modifying the air itself through fumigation. If an unclean spirit is an air entity occupying a space, the logic dictated that you could displace it by filling that air with something dense, overpowering, and hostile. Hence the widespread historical use of intense incense smoke, burning resins, and smudging.
It's like using tear gas on the squatters.
That's a very accurate comparison. The heavy particulate matter, the thick smoke, and the pungent, sometimes acrid odors of things like frankincense, myrrh, or burning sulfur were believed to be physically intolerable to the spiritual entity, forcing it to flee the host.
And this wasn't just a Middle Eastern or European concept.
Yeah.
I found a reference to a 12th century Taoist text written by a practitioner named Lu Shizong.
Oh, yes.
He viewed parasitic disease explicitly as a demonic invasion of the organs. But his cure didn't rely on smoke. He used complex written talismans and highly specific vocal incantations to essentially serve the demons with a divine eviction notice, commanding higher gods to descend and aggressively expel the demonic worms from the patient's body.
It's a bureaucratic and spiritual expulsion. But while the spiritual practitioners were using smoke, breath, and talismans, the early modern and medieval doctors who believed in humoral medicine were using a much more, violently physical approach.
Very violent.
Because they believed that worms were born out of a stagnant, rotting swamp of corrupt tumors in the gut, the only logical treatment was to violently drain the swamp.
And they did this using incredibly harsh, bitter plants. The texts are filled with recipes utilizing wormwood, which literally has the word worm in it for a reason, right? Gentian root and tansy.
The pharmacological goal here was extreme purgation. When you ingest incredibly bitter, toxic alkaloids like those found in wormwood, your body recognizes it as a poison. It stimulates the vagus nerve, it forces your liver to dump massive amounts of bile into the intestines, and it triggers hyperperistalsis.
Meaning your intestines start spasming violently to get the poison out.
Exactly. The goal was to provoke a massive, explosive bout of diarrhea and vomiting, to forcefully flush both the corrupt humors and the worms out of the system in a tidal wave of biological evacuation. It was violent by design.
And what's wild is that this thread continues straight into modern fringe and alternative practices.
Yeah.
If you look at the historical folklore and modern alternative forums, they talk extensively about using tinctures of black walnut hulls, cloves, turpentine, and castor oil. These substances have been used historically by various cultures to physically paralyze and expel intestinal parasites. But the mind-blowing part is that many of these exact same cultures simultaneously use those exact same plants like cloves and black walnut in spiritual protection rituals to ward off curses and negative entities.
It is the ultimate convergence of the two paradigms. The exact same bitter botanical compound is ingested by one practitioner to kill a physical tapeworm and burned or worn by another practitioner to repel an evil spirit. The plant is simply recognized as fundamentally hostile to invaders, regardless of what you call the invader.
So we have smoke, we have explosive botanical purgatives. What is the modern medical equivalent of the eviction protocol? Because I assume a modern gastroenterologist isn't giving you turpentine.
Modern biomedicine utilizes what we might call a highly targeted military approach. The goal is no longer just flushing the system, it is the molecular assassination of the parasite. We use synthetic, highly potent drugs. For example, for tapeworms or flukes, doctors use praziquantel, which we discussed earlier, which paralyzes the worm. For protozoal infections like Giardia, they use metronidazole, commonly known as Flagyl. For fungal overgrowths, they might use nystatin or diflucan.
These are precision-engineered chemical weapons designed to carpet bomb the squatters. You take a pill, it enters your bloodstream, it finds the specific receptor on the parasite, and it kills it. Fast, clean, efficient.
But here is where the story gets incredibly complex, and where ancient medical wisdom actually offers a profound critique of this modern aggressive approach. Let's look at traditional Chinese medicine's concept of Ge syndrome.
What is Guz syndrome?
Gout translates roughly to chronic entrenched parasitism. It's a systemic infestation that has bypassed the body's initial defenses. Traditional Chinese medicine has over 2,500 years of documented clinical experience treating this specific condition.
That's a lot of clinical data.
Yes, and their classical texts explicitly, repeatedly warn against the modern strategy of just dropping a chemical bomb on the digestive tract to quickly kill the invaders.
Wait, why? If you have a tapeworm or a massive protozoal infection, shouldn't you just nuke it with the strongest pill available to get it out immediately?
According to the ancient Gu approach, absolutely not. Their reasoning, which maps fascinatingly onto modern understandings of the microbiome, is that highly abrasive, aggressive treatments act like a carpet bomb.
Right.
They might successfully kill the bulk of the adult worms in the center of the digestive tract, but in doing so, they severely damage the mucosal lining of the intestines and devastate the patient's overall biological constitution.
So you're literally blowing up the luxury hotel while trying to shoot the squatters inside.
Yes, you compromise the integrity of the host. And even more terrifying, the Chinese medical texts warn that if you attack a severe multi-organism infection too aggressively, the surviving pathogens, particularly yeasts, fungi, and protozoa, will flee the hostile environment of the gut. They will drill through the weakened intestinal walls, what we now call leaky gut syndrome, and enter the bloodstream. They become systemic, hiding deeper inside the central nervous system, the joints, and the internal organ tissues where the drugs have a harder time reaching them.
That is a horrifying thought. By fighting the possession too aggressively and arrogantly, you don't eliminate the threat. You just force the demon to dig deeper into the walls of the hotel and entrench itself more permanently in your organs.
Which is why the classical gut treatments take a much slower, agonizingly patient approach. They use complex herbal formulas designed not primarily to kill the parasite, but to slowly alter the terrain of the body, making it inhospitable over many months, while simultaneously strengthening the host's immune system to slowly push the invader out naturally.
But sometimes, slow terrain modification isn't an option. Sometimes the drugs fail, the smoke fails, the fasting fails, and the squatter is just sitting there destroying the suite. Which brings us to step 3 of the eviction guide: mechanical extraction and bizarre lore.
This is where it gets visceral.
Yeah, sometimes you just have to grab the invader by the collar, drag them kicking and screaming through the lobby, and throw them out the front door.
And there is no more visceral, historical example of mechanical extraction than the treatment for the guinea worm, which we discussed in the first segment.
Right, the 3-foot worm.
Remember, this is the 3-foot-long worm burning a hole through your leg. There is no pill you can take that safely kills a 3-foot worm inside your leg.
Why not?
If you kill it while it's in there, your body can't absorb that massive amount of dead, rotting tissue, and you will die of sepsis or anaphylactic shock.
So what do? I read the clinical descriptions of this in the sources and my jaw hit the floor. The ancient extraction method, which astonishingly is still the primary, most effective medical method used in the field today, is entirely mechanical and deeply unsettling.
You have to wait for the female worm to poke her head out of the blister on your skin to release her larva. And the moment she emerges, the healer carefully grasps the tip of the worm and ties it around a small wooden stick or a piece of rolled gauze.
And then they just pull it out like a string, right?
Absolutely not. If you pull even slightly too hard, the worm's body, which is fragile, will snap.
Oh, God.
If it snaps, the dead portion retracts back deep inside the muscle tissue of your leg. It will immediately putrefy, causing a massive, often fatal bacterial infection and severe tissue necrosis. You might lose the leg or your life.
Oh, my God.
So the extraction process requires inhuman patience. The healer turns the stick maybe a fraction of an inch, rolling a tiny bit of the worm onto the wood, and then they stop.
They just stop.
They stop, they bandage it up. The next day, they turn it another fraction of an inch. This torturous process can take weeks, sometimes months, of the patient walking around with a stick taped to their leg, slowly, meticulously winding a living monster out of their flesh.
It's agonizing.
Yeah.
And medical historians have proposed this brilliant speculation that this horrific, ancient, entirely practical procedure is actually the origin of the caduceus.
Yeah.
The universal symbol of medicine that you see on hospitals and ambulances everywhere, the serpent wound tightly around a wooden staff. It might not be a mythological serpent at all. It might literally be a stylized drawing of a doctor successfully extracting a guinea worm on a stick.
It is a profound reminder of how deeply these ancient, visceral struggles against parasites are permanently encoded into the DNA of our cultural symbols. And this concept of mechanical extraction, physically pulling the entity out, takes many different fascinating forms across various cultures. Let's look at the African American hoodoo traditions detailed in the anthropological sources.
This was one of the most fascinating parts of the research. In hoodoo, illness isn't always seen as just a biological malfunction. It's often attributed to an unnatural infestation, like someone has put something on you, causing you to be infested by supernatural spiders, bugs, snakes, or lizards that are eating you from the inside out.
Yes, it's a spiritual attack that manifests physically, and the sources describe a highly specific historical ritual used by root workers to draw out these supernatural infestations.
Tell us about it.
The practitioner would take a razor or a needle and lightly prick the back of the patient's neck to draw a small amount of blood. Then they would take a hollowed-out animal horn, a cupping horn, and apply it over the cut, creating a vacuum to draw out the corruption.
And then the practitioner would dramatically pull the horn away and physically drop a young snake or a frog or a lizard out of the horn and onto a plate of salt that had been placed on the floor.
Because, as the practitioners noted, snakes don't like salt. The salt neutralizes the entity.
Now, obviously, a modern skeptic looks at that and says, that's just sleight of hand. The root worker hit a snake in the horn to trick the patient. But that misses the point entirely, doesn't it?
It completely misses the psychological and spiritual genius of the ritual. The practitioner is externalizing the internal demon. The patient feels consumed by an invisible, writhing terror inside them. They can't sleep, they can't eat. They are wasting away from anxiety and illness.
Yeah, they're suffering.
By performing a dramatic physical extraction, the healer gives the patient a tangible, physical enemy to look at. They can see the demon dying in the salt. The psychological relief, the placebo effect, combined with spiritual catharsis, can trigger massive biological healing responses in the body.
It's the ultimate theater of healing.
Mm-hmm.
And medieval Europe had their own incredibly bizarre versions of mechanical extraction for things we now know have absolutely nothing to do with worms, like toothaches.
Yes, the infamous toothworms. For centuries, across multiple continents actually, people believed that dental cavities weren't caused by plaque and bacteria, but by literal tiny worms that burrowed into the teeth and drank the blood of the jaw.
Which, I mean, makes sense. A cavity looks exactly like a wormhole in an apple, and the nerve pain feels like something is actively biting you. So how did they mechanically extract a toothworm?
The primary medieval treatment was fumigation, but with a specific mechanical goal. They would take henbane seeds, which are highly toxic, or chamomile, and drop them on a hot coal. The patient would inhale the smoke through a funnel directed right at the rotting tooth.
And here's the crazy part. Henbane actually contains potent alkaloids like scopolamine and hyoscyamine, which are strong analgesics and mild anesthetics.
That's right.
So the smoke literally did numb the nerve pain. The patient felt the pain stop, and they assumed the smoke had successfully choked the worm to death.
It was the right result for the completely wrong biological reason.
Yeah.
But my favorite example of this logic involves earworms. And we don't mean a catchy pop song you can't get out of your head.
Definitely not.
We're talking about the medieval belief that a tingling, itching, deep earache was caused by a worm crawling around inside your ear canal.
And the cure for this is objectively hilarious. The physician we mentioned earlier, Gilbert the Englishman, wrote down his prescribed treatment. He suggested taking a warm, heavily scented ripe apple and leaving it right next to the patient's ear while they slept overnight.
Yes, the warm apple trick.
The underlying logic was that the warmth and the sweet, sugary scent of the fruit would tempt the worm. It would crawl out of the dark ear canal to eat the apple, and in the morning, you would find the worm safely burrowed inside the fruit, and your earache would be gone.
It's an application of pure sympathetic magic mixed with rudimentary animal behavior.
It's like leaving a saucer of warm milk out on the porch to catch a stray cat. Here, kitty, kitty! It is so intensely practical and yet completely wonderfully misguided based on their total misunderstanding of human anatomy. But you have to respect the logic. If you believe the problem is a hungry animal in your head, you lure it out with food.
It perfectly highlights the immense creativity of the human mind trying to solve the terrifying problem of the invisible invader with the limited tools at their disposal. But here is the critical flaw in almost every method we've discussed so far.
What is it?
Once you get the invader out, whether you lure it with a warm apple, wind it out on a stick, purge it with wormwood, or blast it with praziquantel, you aren't done. The eviction isn't the end of the story.
Which brings us to step 4 of the eviction guide, filling the void and preventing return. Because think about our luxury hotel. You've kicked the squatters out. But the front door is kicked off its hinges, the security system is down, and the suites are empty.
Exactly.
If you just leave it like that, what's going to happen? The squatters are coming right back and they're bringing friends.
This concept is incredibly deeply rooted in the ancient spiritual texts. The sources cite a profound biblical warning from the Gospel of Matthew chapter 12, which directly addresses the aftermath of an exorcism. The text states that when an unclean spirit is cast out of a person, it wanders through dry, arid places seeking rest. Finding none, it says, "I will return to my house from which I came."
And it comes back and it finds the house empty, swept clean, and put in order.
Exactly. And because the void was left completely empty, the demon goes and recruits 7 other spirits, more wicked than itself, and they all enter and dwell there. The text concludes that the final state of that person is far worse than the first. The spiritual prescription here is absolute. You cannot simply empty the body of evil. Eradication is not enough. You must actively fill the spiritual void. In the Christian context, you fill it with the Holy Spirit, with virtue, with prayer, to create an energetic barrier that prevents reinfestation.
Okay, now let's pivot and look at the exact modern biological equivalent of this concept, preventing the return. And there is no better example than looking at how modern public health is currently dealing with the guinea worm dracunculiasis.
The modern campaign to eradicate the guinea worm is one of the greatest yet least talked about public health success stories in human history, heavily spearheaded by the Carter Center.
Oh, Jimmy Carter's foundation.
Yes. To give you context, prior to the 1980s, there were an estimated 3.5 million to perhaps tens of millions of sufferers globally, primarily across Africa and Asia. By the end of 2022, there were only 13 documented human cases on the entire planet.
13 cases. We are on the verge of driving this ancient horror into total extinction. And the crazy part is how they did it. They didn't invent a fancy billion-dollar mRNA vaccine.
No, they didn't.
They didn't develop some miraculous new synthetic drug to kill the worm in the body, because as we established, killing it inside the body is too dangerous. They achieved near eradication entirely by focusing on step 4, securing the perimeter of the hotel and filling the void with knowledge.
Precisely. The campaign worked by identifying the exact life cycle of the parasite and implementing devastatingly simple practical barriers to break that cycle. They realized that if a stagnant pond is the village's only water source, the water fleas are the vector.
Right.
So they distributed millions of simple, finely woven nylon pipe filters. When a person drinks through the pipe, the nylon mesh catches the microscopic fleas, the water gets through, the parasite doesn't.
They also treated contaminated stagnant water sources with a mild larvicide called Timaphos to kill the fleas en masse. But the most crucial element, the way they filled the void, was through massive grassroots education.
That education was key.
They taught village-based health workers to identify the early signs of a blister. And they educated sufferers that no matter how intensely the blister burned, they must never, under any circumstances, enter the communal water supply to cool it down.
By preventing the female worm from releasing her larvae into the water, they completely severed the chain of transmission. The parasite was eradicated not by a medical magic bullet, but by altering human behavior and managing the environmental ecosystem.
It's a masterpiece of preventative medicine. But looking at all of this, comparing the ancient spiritual exorcisms to the modern public health campaigns, it makes me pause. Modern medicine gave us nylon filters and genomic sequencing, which is objectively miraculous.
Absolutely.
We are living longer, healthier lives than anyone in human history. But did we lose something vital in this transition? When we discarded this spiritual vocabulary, did we also lose the holistic perspective of viewing the body as a complex, interconnected ecosystem?
This is a critical point for reflection, and many medical anthropologists argue that, yes, something profound was lost. What we largely abandoned was the complementary approach to healing. Modern biomedicine, by necessity, relies heavily on an oppositional perspective.
What do you mean by oppositional?
The invader is viewed purely as a hostile enemy force that must be identified, isolated, and eradicated with extreme prejudice.
Ah, the military approach. We find the target, and we carpet bomb it with antibiotics and antiparasitics.
Yes. But ancient traditions, whether it's Chinese medicine, Ayurvedic texts from India, or even indigenous spiritual practices, heavily emphasized a complementary view. The ultimate goal wasn't always just to violently kill every single microscopic
It
organism.
was about balance.
Exactly. It was about harmonizing the body's internal environment. It was about rebuilding the patient's holistic constitution, filling the physical and spiritual void rather than just leaving the body as a blasted, sterile battlefield. When your entire medical philosophy is focused only on killing the worm, you often forget to heal the host.
Which perfectly and somewhat terrifyingly sets up our final segment, Segment 6, Zombification, Mind Control, and Modern Demons. If ancient people believed that demons possessed humans to alter their behavior, tweak their minds, and make them act against their own free will, modern biological science has actually found a literal, microscopic equivalent.
We have to talk about Toxoplasma gondii. If you ever wanted scientific proof that an invisible internal entity can hack your nervous system and control your mind, this is it.
Tell us about it.
Toxoplasma is a single-celled parasitic protozoan, and the scientific literature details how it literally zombifies its hosts to achieve its biological imperative.
The mechanism of how this works is so devious, it's hard to believe it's real. Toxoplasma can only sexually reproduce inside the intestines of cats. That is its ultimate biological goal, get inside a feline.
Right.
But to get into a cat, it often infects secondary hosts, primarily rodents like mice.
Now, obviously, a normal, healthy mouse is terrified of cats. It has millions of years of evolutionary instinct hardwired into its brain, telling it to flee when it smells cat urine. So the parasite faces a problem. How does it get a terrified mouse into the mouth of a cat?
It rewires the mouse's brain.
It physically alters the neural architecture. When a mouse ingests Toxoplasma, the parasite migrates to the brain and forms thousands of microscopic cysts, particularly congregating around the amygdala, which is the brain's fear processing center.
Okay, and then what?
The parasite then begins to secrete enzymes that increase the production of dopamine in the mouse's brain, and it uses epigenetic manipulation to silence the specific genes associated with the fear response.
It literally deletes the mouse's fear of cats.
It goes further than that. It doesn't just remove the fear, it scrambles the olfactory pathways. It makes the mouse sexually attracted to the smell of cat urine.
You're kidding.
No, the infected mouse will actively seek out areas marked by cats, casually wandering out into the open, serving itself up on a silver platter so the cat will eat it, allowing the parasite to complete its life cycle in the cat's gut. It is literal biological mind control.
And here's the kicker. This parasite infects humans too. It's estimated that up to 1/3 of the global human population carries Toxoplasma cysts in their brains, usually acquired from handling cat litter or eating undercooked meat.
It's incredibly common.
While it's largely asymptomatic in healthy adults, emerging research links it to subtle behavioral changes in humans, increased risk-taking, slower reaction times, and correlations with certain psychiatric disorders like schizophrenia.
The sources highlight fascinating research by a pharmacologist named Dr. Sullivan, who has been studying how to defeat these cysts. They screened hundreds of existing drugs and found that an old FDA-approved blood pressure medication called guanabens actually has a miraculous off-target effect.
Wait, a blood pressure pill cures mind control parasites?
It comes down to cellular stress mechanisms. Guanabens is an alpha-2 adrenergic receptor agonist. But it turns out it also blocks a specific pathway in the brain cells that the Toxoplasma cysts rely on to survive.
Oh, wow.
By blocking this pathway, the drug deprives the cysts of the cellular resources they need, causing the cysts in the brain to literally shrivel up and die. And when the cysts die in the mice models, the neuroinflammation decreases and the behavioral changes, the zombification reverses. The mouse gets its fear back.
So we have a living biological organism that demonstrably alters behavior, overrides free will, and manipulates psychology, which is then cured by a specific synthetic chemical compound. Which brings us to the most controversial, fascinating, and explosive cultural phenomenon in our source stack. We spent a lot of time analyzing transcripts from modern internet culture, specifically looking at alternative health forums and podcasts like Ward Radio.
And again, we must be absolutely unequivocally clear to our listeners. We are impartially reporting on these internet claims purely as a sociological and cultural phenomenon. We are mapping how modern people think about disease.
Exactly.
We are not taking sides in the political or medical debates. We are not endorsing these viewpoints. And we are certainly not offering medical advice or suggesting you take any specific medications.
100%. But we have to look at what large groups of people are saying, because the rhetoric perfectly mirrors the ancient spiritual texts we've been discussing. In these massive internet communities, people are claiming that modern epidemics of severe depression, extreme anxiety, and even what they describe as depraved, irrational, or crazy behavior are not just psychological issues.
Right.
They claim these are symptoms of widespread, undiagnosed parasitic infections. And they claim that taking deworming medications, the sources specifically dive into the massive cultural controversy around ivermectin, cures these mental afflictions.
The cultural narrative being constructed in these spaces is deeply compelling to many. They report taking these anti-parasitic medications, physically expelling what they believe to be massive amounts of parasites, and suddenly their severe mental health issues vanish.
They describe a lifting of a brain fog.
Correct. Yes, a lifting of brain fog, a cessation of intrusive thoughts, and a return to feeling normal and in control of their own minds.
So, as analysts looking at the long arc of history, what does this all mean? Let's look at the profound philosophical implications here, because it ties everything together. If a person's severe depression, erratic behavior, or altered personality is genuinely cured by killing a physical parasite in their body, was that parasite effectively functioning as a demon?
The authors exploring the hidden connection between the physical and spiritual realms argue exactly that point. They point out the functional equivalence. In traditional Christianity, demonic possession causes erratic behavior, suffering, and a loss of autonomy.
Yes.
In Hinduism and Tibetan Buddhism, hungry ghosts and entities feed off a person's negative emotions and toxic behaviors. If a physical parasite also causes erratic behavior, secretes neurotoxins that cause depression, and thrives in a biologically toxic bodily environment, the functional result on the human host is utterly identical.
Right. Just think about this comparison. Let's say it's the year 1200. An ancient priest sees a man acting erratically, screaming, unable to focus. The priest decides the man is possessed by an unclean spirit.
Okay.
He gives the man a violently bitter wormwood purgative, burns some frankincense, and performs a ritual. The man expels a massive, physical, rotting mass from his gut. His fever breaks, his inflammation drops, and his mind returns to normal. The priest says, "I have cast out the demon."
Now fast forward to today. A modern gastroenterologist and a psychiatrist see a man acting erratically, exhibiting severe anxiety and cognitive decline. They run a blood test, diagnose a systemic parasitic infection causing massive neuroinflammation.
Yep.
They give him a synthetic, molecularly targeted anti-parasitic pill. The man kills the parasites, his inflammation drops, and his mind returns to normal. The doctor says, "I have cured the infection."
Are they just doing the exact same job, utilizing the exact same underlying mechanism of altering the host biology to expel an invader, just wearing different uniforms and using different vocabularies?
It is a breathtaking synthesis. The ancient priest and the modern doctor are both identifying an invasive, non-self force that has compromised the host's autonomy. They both utilize a specific, targeted intervention, one botanical and ritualistic, one synthetic and clinical, to make the internal environment utterly inhospitable to the invader.
Yeah.
And they both aim for the exact same outcome, restoring the host to their baseline state of physical, mental, and spiritual harmony. The labels demon versus helminth, unclean spirit versus toxoplasma are different, but the fundamental visceral human experience of invasion and liberation remains entirely unchanged.
So, let's bring this massive journey all together. We started this deep dive looking for a step-by-step guide to removing internal invaders, and we've seen this incredible evolving manual of eviction. Humanity moved from viewing these squatters as evil spirits requiring breath, smoke, fasting, and talismans, to viewing them as spontaneous generations of corrupt humors needing warm apples and violently bitter purgatives, and finally to viewing them as genetically sequenced organisms requiring molecularly targeted synthetic drugs.
Yet, despite all our genomic sequencing and pharmacological advancements, the fundamental visceral human revulsion of being consumed from within hasn't changed a bit. The Jungian shadow of the worm remains intact.
It really is.
We are still deeply, primally terrified of the invisible things that can break into the hotel, bypass security, and take over the control room of our minds.
But I want to leave you, our listener, with a final provocative thought to mull over as you go about your day. Historically, we clearly moved from the spiritual, holistic paradigm of demons to the highly isolated biological paradigm of parasites. And there's no doubt that the oppositional military approach of modern biomedicine has saved millions of lives. But what if the future of ultimate health actually requires us to circle back just a bit and embrace a new, complementary view of our bodies?
A return to the concept of harmonization rather than sheer eradication.
Exactly. Because as modern science is discovering, with the explosion of research into the human microbiome, our bodies actually depend on millions of microscopic organisms, bacteria, fungi, even certain benign viruses and protozoa, to regulate our mood, digest our food, and train our immune system. We are not pristine, empty luxury hotels.
We never were.
We are bustling, incredibly diverse ecosystems.
And that realization challenges the very core of the military carpet-bombing approach to medicine. If you nuke the forest to kill a single invasive predator, the forest dies.
It does. Maybe the ancient holistic idea wasn't entirely wrong. Perhaps ultimate health isn't about perfectly sanitizing the body, living in a sterile filtered bubble and aggressively carpet-bombing every single foreign entity that crosses the threshold. Maybe the future of medicine, the true ultimate health, is learning how to beautifully and peacefully negotiate with the thousands of demons and spirits that already call our bodies home. So next time you feel a little unexplained rumble in your stomach, just remember the muddy waters of diagnosis are vastly deeper and far more crowded than you think.